next video is going to focus on fishing for trout and salmon on the west end of the lake in the months of May and early June. Now, in my opinion, there's really no better time or place to be for fishing in Lake Ontario than the west side of the lake, particularly near the Niagara Bar, pretty much for the entire month of May. Got to remember, all the warmest water in the entire lake stacks up on the west side, basically in the outflow of the Niagara River. Lake Erie is a shallower body of water. It warms up quicker. We get warm, nutrient-rich water washing out of Lake Erie through Niagara Falls onto the Niagara Bar. That dumps a bunch of sediment and warm water, and that's what brings in all the bait fish, and you can pretty much rest assured that where there's bait fish, there's going to be king salmon. It's my opinion that probably 3/4 of the salmon in the entire lake are down on the west side of the lake in May. I mean, they just have the feed bag on heavy. So there's basically 3 ways to target these fish, or 3 distinct patterns that we use to fish on the west side of the lake, and this is from like Oak Orchard all the way to the Niagara River in the month of May. The first place, and probably the most common place people target them, is right on the edge of the Niagara Bar. Basically, at where the Niagara dumps into Lake Ontario, it washes a bunch of sediment, and although Lake Ontario normally is a nice steady drop off as you get further and further from shore, right in that outflow of the Niagara, it's actually, the water's significantly shallower right there. It's shallower, the water's warmer, it's full of nutrients, and that's where the bait fish stack up. Now, the fish may be on the high side of the bar, so they may be on the shallow side of the drop-off and, 60 to 100 feet, but then the bar drops off pretty abruptly and steadily as you go north of the bar from 100 all the way down to like 400-something feet. And these salmon and trout will be stacked up anywhere from the Canadian border all the way to the bar stretches, I think 5-6 miles to the east, and those fish might be anywhere from right on the edge to the eastern edge of the bar, and anywhere from the shallow side, which is 60, 70, 80 feet, all the way out to 400 feet, depending on what the conditions dictate. Problem with fishing down there is that the traffic can be just ungodly. There can be so many boats stacked up in these fish. If fish are stacked up in a certain depth, you'll see literally hundreds of boats all in that same depth. So it can be a very productive way of fishing. It can also be a very frustrating place to fish because of how many boats are there and how many people are fishing. Got to be careful about running too many long lines or things like that, because you're just asking for tangles and problems. So the first place you look, especially earlier in the season, is right directly on the bar, either on the high side or on the drop-off. The second place to look for fish is basically during the month of May, depending on conditions. Usually there's salmon in the nearshore water, and that's anywhere from 50 to 150 feet of water, and they can be anywhere from the edge of the bar all the way to Oak Orchard, depending on what the conditions are. I've seen them for the Wilson Harbor Invitational or for the Niagara Pro-Am. I've seen guys do well all the way from the bar to probably about 20 miles to the east of Olcott, depending on the conditions. But you do have a distinct group of fish that sort of hangs out in that near shore water, say less than 200 feet. And that's usually kings and cohos and lake trout. We target them using all the typical stuff that you would use for kings, flasher flies, spoons, although I find it does tend to be a pretty heavy spoon bite early in the season, and then even sometimes on cut bait. And then the third type of fishing we do on the west side of the lake is sort of a mid to offshore bite. Usually that happens a little bit later in May, early June. That's when the water starts to set up. These fish will sort of push out into the deeper water. You'll see them, find temperature breaks or scum breaks or anything like that. And a lot of times we're actually fishing those fish a little bit higher. we're fishing them in that sort of upper echelon of the upper slice of water, anywhere from the surface all the way to maybe 30 or 40 or 50 feet down. I find a lot of times this bite is more focused on coho salmon and steelhead. You do catch an occasional lake trout up there on the surface stuff as well. That offshore bite is a lot of times focused on small red stuff, little red spoons, little red coho dodgers and flies, or small spoons in your typical greens and silvers and blues and that sort of thing. So those are the three types of fishing that I see happen on the west side of the lake in May.